Thank you, Bob. Thanks, Elizabeth, and for organizing all this and being emails back and forth. Appreciate the opportunity to join you today. This next one's for Chris, actually. I had one of the nice things about being here is that I've left snow and ice in Vermont, and I wanted to get a picture of that to show you, but I was in such a rush to get on the plane that I wasn't able to get one. But I did get this picture of my office. This one was taken last July. That's not true. Hope that's the only thing I say that's not true. So no real disclosures to make, except that, as Dr. Murray said, I'm like a lot of you, I'm a general pediatrician, a guy in the trenches. And I also have, like a lot of you, have this strong belief in lifelong learning and this strong belief that no matter how good the care is that we already give, that we could do even better for our patients. We can keep working to improve and be even better. And that's what ongoing certification, or MLC, is supposed to be all about. But when I grumbled a little bit and said, well, I really believe in this, but I wasn't as fond of the process of MLC. Well, if you complain enough, then you can get yourself some work. So I am working hard with the board to try to make changes to make it more relevant, more meaningful, easier to do. But I do believe strongly in it. So I want to, first I want to say, when I talked to Elizabeth ahead of time, I was trying to get from her what you might like to hear about. And we talked about different things and some questions, some thoughts, and I started daydreaming a bit. And actually, I did a video of my daydream, and here it is. Get up and dance. Come on, it's just like lunch. It's time to move those bodies around. Dr. Murray, nutrition guy. Come on, Doc, get him going. So the idea is, why MLC? But before I really had this solid in my mind, I daydreamed a little bit more. Things became a little bit clearer to me, and this is what I saw in that video. I guess I better stop with that. But that did lead me to think about the objectives that I would like to talk with you about this morning into the early part of the afternoon. I want to give you just a little bit of the history of why we have this program, why we do it, fairly briefly. But what I really want to spend time on are two things. One is an overview of the recent improvements that the ABP has made in parts 2, 3, and 4. Talk just briefly about the fees, and then I hope there's an equal amount of time to listen for your ideas. I'm on the road to let you know what's happening at the board, but also to try to find ways in which we can continue to improve this and make it better. So why do I have to do this MLC? For most of us, our days are busy enough. Some of us start off in the hospital with some hospital rounds, seeing some babies. Others spend the whole day there. We spend time in our office. We're seeing a whole variety of problems going on in our office with different kids. We're on the phone. We're talking to parents, patients, colleagues, referral sources, insurers. We're trying to devote some time to make some community contributions. And then, we really would like to spend a little bit of time of that day with the thing that's most important to us, and that's our families. So how do we justify this MLC business? Well, this, first of all, the certification program goes back to 1933, when the AAP decided that there ought to be an independent organization that could certify that people taking care of children were trained based on standards of excellence to lead to high quality of care. Until that time, all you needed to do to be a pediatrician was to write pediatrician on a card and tack that up on your door, and that was all that it took. And the AAP said there ought to be some other standard setting. And so that together with the AMA and the American Pediatric Society, they formed the ABP as an independent organization. And the first exams were given in 1934. Those were written essays and oral exams, and that meant permanent certification at the time. You've proven yourself in your training, you can now go out and legitimately hang up that sign. But what's happened? That certification process has evolved. 50 years later, almost all boards decided that we ought to be reassessing people to make sure that they still are meeting those standards. And then over the last 15, 20 years, there have been additional changes in terms of four-part program, point systems, and on to what we're going to talk about today, some with MOCA-PEDS. We'll talk about that. So why these changes? I mean, MOC has been, it's a bit of a hassle enough, and I've just sort of finally got it figured out looking at that website, and now you're telling me that it's got to change. Why in the world are we doing these things? Well, two reasons. Number one is the explosion of knowledge that's taken place. Just in this grainy graph, just as some indication, if you look back to when I trained in the 1970s, there were about 200,000 medical articles per year published in America. They weren't all good, but it's an indication of how much new knowledge was coming out. And today there's over 1 million per year. And in our own journal, that is the pediatrics, the AAP journal, there now are 1,000 more articles per year being submitted than just 7 years ago. One reason is this explosion of knowledge. The other is the recognition of medical errors. So in around the year 2000, the Institute of Medicine, now called the National Academy of Medicine, had two publications, To Err as Human and Crossing the Quality Chasm. And among other things in those publications, it was pointed out that that medical errors led to over 100,000 deaths per year in the United States. That number is now over 400,000 estimated. Hospitalized children have a medical error rate of 2 to 3 per 100 discharges. There's a 25% incidence of medication errors. This is in outpatient as well as inpatient. This involves prescribing, dispensing, administering these medications. So the board certification has evolved. It evolved from a single test of knowledge that in an early point in one's career to a periodic test of knowledge, and now to a more continuous measure of knowledge acquisition and quality improvement. So MOC is about staying current, but it's about more than that. It's about also attempting to improve the care we're giving, and I'll say this a few more times as well, even though that care is already at a high level. So we're now into this four-part MOC. And I think you're familiar with these. Very quickly, part one is a pretty low bar right now. You have to have a license and not be in jail. So,
or not have been in jail.
And I think there's only 2 of you in this room that no, I won't say any names. And then what we're going to talk about are those other parts, those parts that do take some of your time, some effort in order to accomplish. But the board isn't trying to leave you out there hanging to dry. By the way, this is Rick. Thanks, your family passed this picture on you. I understand this is a pretty common experience in your life growing up. So let's get started now. Let's talk about part 2 first of all, lifelong learning and self-assessment. And I'm going to start each of these parts by telling you in abbreviated form and leaving out some of the colorful words, some of the main complaints that come into the board about each of these parts. I already keep up. Well, I can't see an e-count for part 2. I'm already doing this stuff. So what's new? Well, MOC points can now be obtained for CME activities. beginning in January of 17, and we do it here, beginning in January of 2017, the board worked together with the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education so that points for CME activities could obtain MLC points as well. You just need to make sure that the assessment criteria that ACCME has is followed. AP chapter meetings, like this one, you can get MLC credit, grand round. You really should be able to get, most people should be able to get all the Part 2 points that you need from activities that you already were doing in the past to get CME for. Grand round to AP chapter meetings, a meeting that you might, a prep meeting that you might go to, and so on. Has this been utilized? Well, in the first 6 months, that was first 6 months of 2017, there were almost 500 Part 2 activities that were registered, and that number is well over 2,300 now. There were over 30,000 MLC points awarded, and that's well over 100,000 now. So people have been making use of that. What else has been going on in Part 2? That's the key, getting points for things you're already doing. The board continues to have new when I say board, I apologize if that's rude. I'm used to saying it about the ABP, so I'm not to take away from your own board here. But the ABP has some new self-assessments based on activities that people had requested to get information on, learning tools on. So professionalism in global health, care of a transgender child, immigration, healthcare, updating patient safety, and the basics of QI. Also been enhancements made to question of the week. Anybody here do question of the week? Any of those hands that are up like it? Nah, his hands went very high. You loved it at first, right? Well, it's a fun activity. You get this once a week. It's free. It's not free, or you paid for it with your registration to the ABP, but there's no additional fee for this. You get something once a week. You get a question. You take as much time as you want to answer it. You answer it. You then get an article which gives us some rationale and a description of that topic. And you answer it again, and that's the one that you get credit for. You can get both CME and MLC credit for that. Here are some recent ones, just to give you an idea of the kinds of questions that come up each week. How good is the power of suggestion to manage a child with functional abdominal pain? You could ask Dr. Murray that one. Should we use or not use ibuprofen post-tonsillectomy? What's the best way to fight off a recurrent case of the runs after a bout of C. diff? So, most cases, people call these practical bits of information. Okay, how about Part 3, the test? The test is the area that the board has spent most time on in the past couple years in trying to change. Complaints came in. This exam every 10 years is not a learning experience. It's a waste of my time. And I hate the testing center. Anybody here hate the testing centers? Yeah. I mean, I went in, I had a cold. We actually get colds in Vermont. And I had a cold, and they said, anything in your pockets? I said, yeah, I've got a handkerchief. They said, we can't take that in, so you've got to use our Kleenex. So I took a couple of Kleenex, and they said, oh, no, you need one Kleenex. And then you come back and you need another. So I hope that none of you followed me on that event. But in any event, so what's new? What is the ABP trying to do to help you? So there's a new program. It's called the MOCA-PEDS. And that stands for Maintenance and Certification Assessment for Pediatrics. This is a new tool that is an assessment for learning as well as a summative exam. And it's modeled after a program that the anesthesiology board had, which was called MOCA Minute. And MOCA Minute, the anesthesiology diplomats get a question once a week. They have 1 minute to answer it. It's an ongoing process. And that was initially set up as an exercise for their Part 2, but it now counts as their test. They, by the way, are modifying that more similarly to what we're doing and what you're going to hear about that we're doing in pediatrics. And almost all boards are now looking to the ABP for this model. So Okay, here's my video camera again. So I go into one of these testing centers. I want to see, was I the only guy that had a hard time? Let's see what happened. So here's a couple of responses from some of the people. That wasn't going to go over. So this is an overview of what Locapeds is all about. First of all, it's a continuous assessment tool. In the pilot years, there are 20 questions quarterly, and there's flexibility in answering these so that you could answer them all at once. I was talking to a person in Mississippi, the president of the Mississippi chapter, who said that she did all these during her lunch hour, one lunch hour. But other people, you can answer them one at a time, one week, a couple the next week. You have that option. They're delivered via the web to your laptop or mobile device in your home or office. It focuses on learning as well as an assessment of knowledge, and they're designed to fulfill the Part 3 requirements. The questions are intended to be an application of knowledge of everyday pediatrics, something that you carry around in your mind or your pocket. You get a short clinical vignette that try to mimic real-world situations. Multiple choice, single best answer. That's at least still the current question type. I think that we'll evolve from that. You get 5 minutes per question. Take all the time you want, prepping, get ready for this thing, but once you click the question and look at the question, you get 5 minutes. You can use resources. You can use any resources that you like, currently other than another human being. And you get instant feedback. So you answer the question and you immediately get a clinical rationale for what the board, what the AVP thought was the right answer, and why they thought that was right, and why they think the other answers weren't so good. And you do get references as well, in case you want to look at that further. So this was piloted, this was pre-piloted in 2016, it was piloted in 2017 and 2018. Over 11,000, almost 12,000 people have been involved in this. The idea was to get as much information as possible to make this something that if people didn't like it, at least they appreciated it as a good model for assessment. For some of us, this is not how MLC came into being. It came from top down, and we got a lot of input from grassroots on how that might be helpful to us in our experiences, in our practices. So this is trying to get the bugs out ahead of time for people to be able to comment and say, this is what we don't like. There have been changes from 2017 to 2018. People in 2017, quite a number of people said that they would like to see not just core knowledge tested, but new knowledge on guidelines or articles. This models after the OB board and a couple of the other boards, so that what will probably take place in 2019 when this goes live is that you'll get 15 questions on core knowledge per quarter instead of 20. And there will be between 0 and 8 questions per year on those guidelines or articles. And a couple of guidelines or articles will be passed out to you in the 1st of January, and not in that first quarter, but in one of the subsequent quarters, you might get somewhere between 0 and 8 questions on those. Yes, Chris?
But how are the questions vetted? Who comes up with the questions and all of that?
Sure. So the questions are you can submit questions. Anybody can submit questions. All those questions are looked at by the testing team. That's headed by a general pediatrician, Laura Brooks from Virginia, and other general pediatricians are on that. By the question writing committees. There are 4 of those. They take a look at all these questions. They go over them again and again. They go from one committee to the next to say, does this sound reasonable to you? They are looked at psychometrically by having gone through pre-testing by people to say, does this question cut the mustard? Do you think that this is fair? If anybody's ever in the Chapel Hill area, you can just go in there, let me know, and just get an idea of this process. It's actually a very, I think, healthy process. But again, people are able to submit questions. Not as many of those questions are taken as those that are written by the people in those committees. some of the ideas from those questions are taken, but they're not always in the same format or with people who have had the same training to write those questions. So this goes live in 2019, as I said. The subspecialties will gradually come in over the next 4 years. You'll enter this at the start of the 5-year cycle during which your next exam due date falls. So for some people, that's not going to be exactly 10 years after your last exam. There will be a few people for whom that will actually be a little bit earlier than that 10-year time when you start entering this cycle. There will be more people than that who will actually, if you consider the break, but will fall further than the 10 years. So it may be 11 or 12 years from your last exam before you need to start this. The idea was to try to get everybody engaged in this and to try to get rid of this 10-year, 5-year confusion. Seems like 5 and 10 ought to be pretty easy, but somehow it's confusing to almost everybody. You got your 5-year cycle, you get a notice with your 10-year exam, your 5-year cycle. So this will all be coordinated now. This is when the subspecialties will roll out. So how about participation during the pilot? The people that were eligible in 2017, people who were in 2016 in the pre-pilot, a notice was sent to every diplomate, whenever it was, the 1st of January or something, for who would like to enroll in the pre-pilot to be part of this. And within 24 hours, there were 2,000 people that had offered to take part in this, and something like 2,400 were involved in the pre-pilot stage. Then in the pilot stage in 2017, those who were due for their exam could elect to participate in this, or they could go ahead and take the proctored exam. So about 75% chose to do the MOCA PEDS, and in 2018, about 80% decided to do that. Subspecialists who were keeping up on their general PEDS exams, of those who were keeping up on that, they're not required to do that, by the way, but those who were keeping up on general PEDS as well as their subspecialty, over 80% registered to participate. So we're able to have a lot of feedback in terms of how this works. And the feedback has brought in, how about resource use? The majority of diplomats used resources, but the majority used it for 5 questions or less. So people tend to use this on things that they don't know as well. And here's a list of the things that they used. Up to Date was the most common resource used. Government sites, search engines, professional association sites, and textbooks were the ones that were most commonly used. So did you learn anything from this? I mean, if we're going to have this as a learning mission as well as a test, did people learn from this? Did you learn, refresh, or enhance your medical knowledge using MOCA PEDS during this pilot phase? This number is pretty impressive. At least these thousands that answered, the answer was yes, they did. Were you able to apply anything that you learned to what you're doing in your practice? Again, it's key to learn something, but can we actually carry this through? So over 60% said they already had by the end of the year, and another 16%, so somewhere around 80%, said that they have already applied things that they've learned in their practice or plan to moving forward. And here are some other comments that are there that on some of the things: antibiotic use, discussions with families, follow up on high blood pressure, just things that there were over 1,500 people that wrote in significant changes that they did as a result of this process. There's a longer comment from a neonatologist, but this neonatologist saying that she really did learn and realized that there were things that maybe she could have done better, and she's having far more frequent discussions now with the general PEDS and subspecialty colleagues, and has become much more facile with this process, and finds herself reading much more general PEDS now as well, and being useful to talking to her colleagues. And I don't think it's in this quote, but further down was that in her quote was that it helped with her teaching. More positive comments: just love the experience. It was a learning experience. This is reflective of real life practice. More comments about people liking this, including subspecialists. I've obviously picked some of the quotes, but this isn't cherry picking on the good ones, how about the bad ones? They're just overwhelmingly positive. For those who heard me give talks on MLC a couple of years ago, I had to talk the good, the bad, and the ugly, and there were comments that tried to give you the range of comments that were coming in about MLC itself. These have been overwhelmingly positive. How about the scoring? Well, you need to do this. It's continuous learning opportunity. You need to do this for the first 4 years of your 5-year cycle. But understanding that life happens, circumstances occur, we have babies, we get unhealthy, our parents get unhealthy, we change jobs, etc. The board will drop the lowest 4 quarters of performance at the end of the year. So at the end of year 4 season. So quick math would tell you that you would know by the end of year 3 whether you're passing. You don't have to do the 5th year, and if you pass the first 3 years, you really don't have to do any more after that. You get 2 years off. However, the good percentage of people who took this in Mocha-Pedes indicated that they would like to continue this in those last 2 years just as a learning experience without having the responsibility or even a little bit of anxiety of having to pass during that time. Based on the 2017 pilot, what are the chances that you'll pass this? They're higher than the proctor exam. They're over 90. They will be over 95%. So what are your options? Well, beginning in 2019, your options will be Mocha-Pedes, and that's the default with enrollment. There's no additional fees for that, and you can earn Part 2 points as well because it's a learning experience. You get Part 2 and Part 4 points. You can still do the proctor exam. That's an option. It will move to an every 5-year instead of every 10-year process, and that is really to come in line with almost every other board. Almost every other board has their exams every 2 years to 5 years. And so our proctor exam will move to every 5. The indications are there will not be many people who will do that, but it will be available. There is a small additional fee that doesn't go to the board that covers the seat fee for going to Prometrics or whatever site you go to for the proctor exam. Okay. How about Part 4? Yes, sure.
Because before you move on to Part 4, and I'm not sure, I'm just going to throw this out there, I'm not sure how I feel about it, because I really haven't thought about it just now. Has there been any talk about initial certification eventually moving to more of a process like Mocha-Pedes?
Yes. The shortest answer you've ever heard from me. We've talked before. Yeah, there has been. It's this took a lot of discussion amongst particularly people with my color hair at the board to change to this in terms of security of the exam and so on. But there is discussion. I think that it would eventually move to something like this. Yeah.
So, I was wondering, I read these.
Thank you.
So I got a letter in November that said this product over the comments that you did sign on for the benefit. And of course, I did not sign up because the real information about what the certified for rules of track. Because I'm new to recertified position. So I'm like, well, I don't know what's happening. I'm going to get your certification and done. It sounds like I needed to do this thing, I do a certification that I will do, it's not gonna last for 10 years.
It may last for more than 10 years.
So I mean, if I go take it, I have to take it as 10-year certification.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Because I was part of the 7-year recertification, and
Right.
the stuff home,
Right.
and I was part of the 10-year recertification for PE, and then now this.
Right.
So my big question is, what should I do? What is more appropriate to do? Because if you're going to say in 2019, everybody here is going to do this, I might as well do this.
Well,
And if you're
20
saying in 2019, the proctor exams will go every 5 years, then my exam I take this year for 10 years, it's going to only last for 5 years, correct?
I don't know whether to say correct or that, I'm sorry. What what you want to do to find out your own situation, because unbelievably, every situation is very different. And I get into hot water when I get in somebody's, and I try to say when you would join in. Everybody will not join in 2019. 2019 is when this goes live. When you join in is when your 5-year cycle begins again. And that's part of this 5-year, 10-year business that's confusing. So it depends on when your 5-year cycle begins, on when you would be due to do that. If you're due this year in 2018,
Yeah.
you're due in 2018.
do for certification. Everything else has been done.
Yeah.
My 4, my 3, everything else.
So it's too late for you to join in on Mokope pilot for 2018. So you would need to do the Proctored exam. And if you call the board, they will tell you when you do that next. You probably have 10 years, okay? But probably is the word, okay? The board is not trying to make it difficult. It's trying to make it easy, but it's also trying to figure out how to wedge everybody into this at a time. So.
It's clearly the letter I got says you have to sign up for the record. Now I thought that.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Everything that people bring up goes back to the board. I discussed every single comment that comes up. I did get something, but everybody didn't, obviously, so I'll try to find out. Yes,
Many subspecialists also like to keep their general pediatrics certification as well, and then you're ending up taking 2 boards, 2 systems. Do you think in this new MOCA system, there might be a way to merge them to some extent where you get 2 general peds questions, 3 subspecialist questions, and you can get recertified in both as opposed to getting 10 questions every month and trying to double dip?
sure. So the answer is right now no, but the board is also looking at that. You know that you can combine the other activities. Every other activity you could use for both. So you don't, your part 4, your part 2, those, you could do all of whatever your subspecialty is, you could do all general peds and still get credit for your subspecialty. I think that it will merge, using your term, into something like that, but it's not going to happen right away. Your comment is a good one, though. What the board has mostly focused on is saying, if you just do your subspecialty, do you have to do your general peds to maintain that, as opposed to merging? So that's a concept that I'll make sure is brought up. Thank you. Okay. Well, part 4. So everybody pretty much loves part 4. So I've left out again some of the words that are inserted in. But there's no evidence that this stuff improves care. It's a waste of time, etc. So what's new in this regard? So the ABP is trying to make every attempt to see that you get credit for work that you're already doing in your offices or workplaces. The idea is, the attempt is to not have you doing extra work. The attempt is to say that many people, most people, are already doing something to improve what they're doing in their care, and that ought to be receiving credit. And the board is trying to make sure that that happens. There are modules from the ABP, from the AAP, from other sources that you can use for those who want to use those. Some people find them helpful. I think most people don't. Most people do those as a homework assignment at the end. They're scrambling. I got to get this done. I got to get my points. And I think that doesn't achieve anything at all. It just takes a lot of your time. It doesn't achieve anything. But it does achieve something when you take time to just get together with your group, with your staff, and just say, how are we doing? What might I do even better? How might I do that? Check it out. It's really what we want done. I think I told Chris this last year, but maybe not. The project that we've done in my office, one of the things that we ran into was a simple thing, but it wasn't simple for patients or staff. And that was people scheduling sports physicals, camp physicals, a week before. If my child's going to camp tomorrow and they need a physical, can Dr. Land see them? Staff were upset, I would come in early and stay late, I'd work through lunch, and still we couldn't handle everybody. There's just too many of those. So they head off to get immediate care service. And then we call them in a couple months and and say, you're due for a physical. They say, well, I've had my physical, I've had my exam. We really have, yes, we have. But, what somebody did was to have them turn their head sideways and cough or some such thing and listen to see that their heart was beating. But they didn't ask them about contraception, they didn't ask them about their behavioral mental health, the issues that are going on in life, the things that we as pediatricians pride ourselves in doing a little different. Bullying, you guys have done some great stuff on bullying, health, wellness, I've seen. Just terrific stuff that I've read about. Smoking, you're gonna hear about later. Took a red sticker, this was done electronically, but you could do it on a paper chart, just took a red sticker and got those people who had called in late, called in 2 weeks or less before those were due. We then had the staff call those people like 3 months before the next year was due and see whether we made progress or not for those people, and then did it one more time. Very simple. Part 4 credit. We improved. We actually made care better for those people. We saw that they got care as opposed to going to an immediate care and not getting a full exam, et cetera. It doesn't have to be difficult. So what are some Part 4 pathways that you can use? Because a significant number of diplomats now, about 45% in 2016, started receiving Part 4 credit for activities initiated by them as individuals, teams, networks, or institutions, and not with modules. It's a kind of wonderful opportunity here as I read about and talk to Dr. Murray about things available to you here in Ohio. But here are some examples of those pathways. Patient-centered medical home. You can get all the points you need for patient-centered medical home. A guy from Ohio, Chris Cunha, and I worked together to get this to count for the board. Smaller, large group quality improvement projects, a project like the one that I mentioned here that we did in my office. Portfolios, I'll talk about that very briefly in just a second. Institutional QI leadership. Anything that you can do that we're attempting to improve the care of patients can count. And there's a streamlined application process. This application started off as 22 questions. They passed it by me because I don't know how to fill out applications. 22 questions. It's pretty good, Dr. Lane. 22? I haven't got time for 22. 16, 14, 12, 10. It's down to 6 questions now. One of them is your name. Okay. So what's the AAP doing with this? They're really doing a lot. This is taken from an article in the AAP News this past September, just emphasizing that quality improvement can shown to be an effective tool in improving the care that children get. The AAP has portfolio status. Portfolio status you can do it in a practice, but it would be expensive for that. But institutions or organizations do this. The AAP does this. Some chapters do this, where you then take on the role of evaluating projects in your local area yourself in terms of the AAP national. And that's really the way we would like it to be. We'd rather not be the ones that are evaluating these, but the people that know you, know your projects, evaluate those. And so with very little oversight from the board, if you achieve portfolio status, you can have somebody locally or an institution to work with, like the AAP, handle this. What else is happening? Well, collaborative learning efforts. I just emphasize again, AAP chapter meetings. Lots of projects come out of AAP chapter meetings, which are then relevant to what you're doing. Not what's happening to me in Vermont, but what are you guys seeing? So a chapter meeting. What are we doing? What might we do a little bit better? Your practice, my practice, what can we model on there a little bit? PDLN QI, this is an activity from the AAP that's similar to the American Board of Pediatrics Small Quality Improvement Project, but it is maybe better. There's no cost to it, and they help you design your project from the beginning. Yeah, you want to do a project, Dr. Murray doesn't have time to help you on obesity, so you're going to do it yourself. So you call AAP, connect with PediaLink, and they'll help you design the project, follow through with it. EQIP and other programs such as that, platforms and poster presentations at NCE, and there are support sessions at the NCE, some of which you can actually get credit for right on the spot. Fees. Just want to make a couple comments about fees. comments that come, $1,304 is way too much to pay. And what if I stop practicing in 2 years? What if I take a year off or do something different? So what's new? Well, the 1304 has stayed the same, but try to get that down. That's staying the same. Actually, for MOC is actually loses money for the ABP with $1,304, but they made a commitment not to increase that fee, and that's not increased for the past 4 or 5 years. But you can now do an annual fee and pay that yearly instead. Still a burden, but not quite that same burden. That wasn't as easy to get accomplished as you might think, but because of IT capability and so on. So in summary, we know you're already doing a great job as pediatricians. You know that, the AP knows that, the ABP knows that. But as a profession, how can we show that you're staying current and making an effort to improve the care that you're giving? Maintaining our certification in a meaningful and relevant way, not a homework way, meaningful and relevant way, including collaborative efforts. Together as a group, together with me, the ideas to take back to the board can show that commitment to improving healthcare for children. Well, that didn't work. Chris, you know how long I worked on that slide? It's supposed to say why MOC is doing it, but in any event, thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your ideas and questions and comments. Thanks a lot. As the questions start, I did pass around a file card. If anybody didn't get one, let me know. If you have more than one question, if you don't get your questions asked or answered fully, or if there's something you don't feel comfortable asking, I hope you feel comfortable asking anything, but if you don't, then write them down and I'll send them back in to Elizabeth and to Bob, and they'll send out an email for you. Yes?
I'm sure you get this question a lot, but
Can we use the mic?
I can speak loudly. I'm sure you get this question a lot, but why is the exam portion and MOC so expensive? It feels as if we are, with institutions or even as primary care physicians, I mean, it comes out of pocket to pay for this, and it seems like it's a pretty extensive cost, not only in my time to put in to do the work, but then also out of pocket for finances.
Very fair question. So everybody can hear the question or ask the question as well yourself. So the cost, so if anything sounds defensive here, tell me to calm down. I don't mean to be defensive. I'm going to give you the information I have because of the same questions that I asked as well. And first of all, the board does more than just do the certification exam, right? It does the certification exam, but it does 15 certification exams. It does 15 MLC exams. It does 15 in-training exams. It evaluates those in-training exams. It does work with standard setting and regulatory process with the ACG and me and with the residency review committee. Does psychometrics to make sure that these work well. As I said, the $1,304, and I'm not saying that that's not a lot. I think it is, especially when I wrote that out in December. Because I was told, well, Phil, congratulations, you're now recertified, and if you send us this check, then you can remain certified next month. So, and that's the time you're trying to do a little something for your office staff, for your family, for your friends, and here's the $1,304. But that loses money for the board. The board, that's paid for partly through the certification process. And as general pediatricians, we're paying a little bit more than our share. We're paying for some of the subspecialties. Why would we do that? We do that because, at least as a profession, the decision has been made that we need, for example, rheumatologists. We need those people. There's only 20 of those people that certify each year. So if those people needed to pay pro rata, they needed to pay their part. They would be paying $12,000 or something, $15,000 for their exams. So it's divided up that way. The cost, this is unbelievable, but the cost per question, to write a question, through all the medical boards is about $3,000 per question. That's not what the ABP is. The ABP is lower than that. But it's an expensive process to go through all this vetting that Chris asked about. They're not all good questions. There's an attempt to make them all be good questions in a good way and be fair. The attempt is to be fair to people. That's some answer for you. I agree with the comment.
This builds on that discussion.
Sure.
And I'll just be blunt and share what's out on the street and
Sure.
tell me if it's true or not.
Sure.
One is that the executives are extremely highly paid, disproportionate to other medical executives. The board is in palatial headquarters in North Carolina. You go to meetings in very high-end resorts. And that the operating margin you currently have is 2 years when most other organizations are happy to have 6 months. I'm just sharing what's out there and I hear it again and again.
Sure, well, thanks. Thanks for the question. So, first of all, here's you can take one of these and we'll give one of these to Bob as well if you want, but just, that's the annual book. But that'll give you an overview and for the question in the back, an overview of the finances. But it's only the overview. It doesn't give you the nitty-gritty that you're asking about. The nitty-gritty is available on GuideStar. You can just Google GuideStar, look up ADP, and the ADP is the most transparent of any of the boards because their Gold Star rating as the most transparent. The number of people paid at the board is very few. There are honorarium given. I get an honorarium for coming today from the board. Not really maybe home, but it's an honorarium. But the vast majority of the work is done by court volunteers. Those volunteers do get, in most instances, get an honorarium. Come to the board, you can have an honorarium. You make more being home. But the executives, some of the information out there is not correct. A lot of it is based on the previous president CEO. And a lot of that is based on numbers are out there that are astronomical. And those are based on what that person received in his last year. And that last year included someone knows the retirement plan is better, but defined payout or some kind of a payout plan for his retirement. He postponed and took that at that point in time at the end, as opposed to collecting it along the way. There's different types of plans. So that was much more than just his salary included there. The current CEO I helped recruit when I was chair of the board. He came at a salary that was less than the previous person had made. He came at a salary that was less than he was making as a professor at Johns Hopkins in critical care. He took a salary cut to come. He has refused to take it, even though the board of directors has authorized or has recommended pay raises for him each year, just even with standard of living in a little bit. He's refused to take any raise since he's been there. His salary is based on what an outside agency declared was an appropriate salary for him, but he took the low end of that. It was based on the mid-range of private school deans, I think. He said he didn't want that, but it's public school deans, which was less. The salary is less than the CEO for the ABMS, for the whole organization boards. It's less than, I think, almost any other specialty boards. I think it's less than AAP leadership make. I'm not talking about this after Murray right now.
I was one of those poor volunteers.
So, the answer is, it's not minimal, but, it is, it's a lot more than I make, but it's, well, there's another part to that though, I think, that I got bumbling on, didn't answer for you, sorry.
Oh,
Where to go, the resorts and stuff like that?
right.
Yeah.
I'm just sharing.
Oh, sure, I appreciate the questions. So in fact, the board, did try to reward, before they gave honorariums, they tried to reward people who wrote the questions and so on by having one meeting in their cycle on the board. It used to be that you would come and have a certain number of years of the question writing committee and so on. They would try to reward you. Chris, you're on that committee, so one time, no, you're not.
Oh, awesome. Where we go?
Not very far these days. And they would try to reward them by having them at a nice place. So they would go to one, go to a place like Keel Island, a pretty expensive place, but they would go off-season. It would be negotiated so that they would go when the weather wasn't great there, but they could get a little rain. But that was an attempt to try to do something for these people who worked very hard and volunteered. With the new CEO in place, ain't gonna happen. So that almost all meetings, they do have a board meeting each year that is in a place like Orlando or something like that, you know. But it's not like they're going to really expensive places anymore. They try to hold all their meetings at in-state places. Cary, they're nice, but they're I'm not knocking our state. I stayed at the Embassy Suites. It's similar to that kind of place for most of the things that they do. They the word on the street was a reaction and and blown up from what it was previously, and it does not apply to what is going on now. To answer most of it, I hope.
The other one was the operating.
Oh, the operating margin, yes. So operating margin actually, the operating margin that most people are told, and I was told the AAP tries to do this as well, is 1.5 times your operating expenses. And that's what the AAP tries to do. It tries to hold on to that for 1.5 times your operating expenses.
The AAP is 6 months.
6 months. That's what they are. That's not what they want to be. And as you know, there was some issues. So, yes.
Just curious, I know Chris kind of asked this question a little earlier, but so I don't understand why the AVP doesn't lean on the AAP's committee structure to write more of the questions. I've been on the injury committee, or I was, for years and years. We've written over 5 or 6 letters to the AVP saying, we've seen some of the questions, they don't hit upon priorities that we think are important, and some of the questions aren't in the way that we think they should be. We've offered to write the questions, and we never even get responses back as to, thank you, we'd love to lean on you, you should really be doing it. So I don't understand why the subspecialists that are the experts that are on the committees and sections of the AAP aren't leaned upon more to write some of these questions.
I'll take it back.
Yeah, because I'm also thinking about all the questions. We've got 260 questions answered out of the AAP. And you're saying we get control part 2 implemented. Why doesn't, maybe the questions are, we even asking those? But you got a whole other group of people making those questions.
Good point.
It's always been confusing to me, you know, I know they're totally separate organizations, but why there doesn't seem to be as much cooperation in this. Like, because we pay pretty good dues for AAP also.
Yeah. Well, I pay more than the $275 per year. I could pay less as a senior now, but I
What's the
supported the
senior age?
AAP and worked on committees and appreciate what they've done.
What's the considered the senior age? I didn't know there was. No, some of us.
You're not old.
No, I was not aware that there was. even
Oh, I'm over
such a-
70, so I and I had another comment, I'm sorry, about one of the other things. Working together. I mean, I get together with the AAP leadership twice a year myself. And so these are things I'll bring up with them as well. I'll meet with them in Toronto, not with all the leadership, but with some of the leadership plus the quality improvement people, to talk about things that we can do together. I think that costs as much. We're doing something for nothing. Why, do you guys really have to charge for it will last then? Well, we'll work on it. We're doing something for nothing. You guys have to charge for it. So there are efforts that are being made that we could be more obviously.
I mean, there's content specifications that come out with the draft. So obviously, if that's what the AAP thinks are the right content specs, I would think that whatever you're testing on would be comparable, because you mentioned Brad was one of your references. So.
There is, but it needs to be more obviously. Needs to be more. Thank you. Yes.
The Ohio Medical Association is leading the charge to make it illegal to have a board certification requirement for medical staff. And same thing for MOC required. We're against that, and so are most of the other specialty organizations in Ohio. Are there any states where a similar thing has occurred and actually passed, and it's kind of the Wild West where board certification isn't a requirement to be on to practice medicine?
Yeah, there are 13 states that have gone through this, and most of them have either dropped it completely or tabled it. I think that Oklahoma passed, and I think one other one passed it. Oklahoma went through, well, I don't know if anybody watched those hearings. They were pretty brutal about the comments that were made, not just about MLC, but about the need for learning. So, to answer your question, I'm not certain, but in there were 13 states that brought this up in front of their legislatures, and almost all of them had postponed it or dropped it. But I think there are two, and Oklahoma won. Did you know the other one?
I can't remember, I think there was 3.
Were there 3? Yeah, sorry. So thanks. What do you think about that? What do you say? You said the group, as a group, you're against it. What are your thoughts?
My concern is I sit on the credentialing committee of my hospital, and I would be terrified to, let's say Oklahoma, you're not board certified, you aren't doing any MOC. I don't think how can we let you on our medical? How can we? We're not. It isn't perfect, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah, absolutely is. And the thing that I'm talking personally now, not just as an APP guy. I mean, I think that we have been privileged to have self-regulation, and as a first step towards government making those decisions, it's worrisome to me. So I appreciate
Tested the post office.
Thanks for your comments. I appreciate your what you spoke up about.
So this is a question that kind of builds on that. As you may know, one of the most vocal groups about some of the concerns with ABPR live on the listserv of the section on administrative and practice management. And there have been some comments where some of the members have said, we're not renewing, we're not going through MOC through the ABP, and are looking at sort of other organizations to get sort of certified. And I'm just wondering what you would say to those members, kind of why ADP is a much better way to go than some of these, I'm going to call them rogue organizations, but others, groups that are offering pediatricians designation.
Sure. Well, I go back, Chris, to the idea that we want to have, I think, as a profession, we want to have, and I want to keep telling you, I'm a guy in the trenches, okay? I'm a guy in the trenches, but who believes in this and loves my profession. I wouldn't trade what I do. You could say I could play center field for the Red Sox. I'd say no, I'd rather do this. But see how to answer this for you. I think that say again what you want to do.
Well, I've seen on the listserv that there are, and I don't know a lot about it because I have no interest in learning about them, but there are some other groups that can give you not board certification, but some sort of credentialing.
Yeah, most of them are not offering certification, right? They say they're not trying to take over certification, but they are an option for ongoing certification. So if you look at what those things, read in detail what you have to do. They're pretty inviting, you know. I mean, one of them you pay $50 a year. You don't have to do anything. One of them you have to do 50 hours or a certain number of hours. You were nodding there, but a certain number of hours of CME over 3 years. Same thing as your licensure. Doesn't really distinguish out from those things that I think we take pride in as being pediatricians.
Well, I think the concern is how does the, you know, how do the parents, how does the public sort of, you get to see you're, you know, endorsed by this, some national organization we know. So, you know, it's getting, how do we let families know that this is the route to go, and this really means something, whereas this designation.
Yeah, so I think that it's clear to me that we need to, the AAP needs to help us, but that the board needs to help show more value to that certification. And that's true because of things that are happening in the market for people who are pediatricians and not pediatricians, maintaining certifications, not. And I've just been in discussions with David Nichols a lot in the last, in this year, 2018, about that. So if you have ideas, send them in. You know, the board has, in the past, has not wanted to be in the marketing business. It wanted to be something that, this certification is something that we're proud of. You know, this example is given a lot, but I just had it recently, going home from Tennessee, and people have brought up, you know, the value of certification. So you've heard this before, but this happened to me just 2 weeks ago. So I'm getting on the plane with this in my mind, and I look at it and I see this pilot. In my mind, I've never stuck my head in and said to a pilot, "Are you certified? Are you keeping up with that?" But I'm counting on them doing that. I'm counting on their profession having standards of excellence that say that they need to keep up with. And by the way, you know, we just had recent things that say we got to trust those pilots off, but those people that come into our offices need to trust us. They need to be aware of that. And as I got on the plane, by the way, we then got out on the runway and all set to take off. Next plane to take off, then we had to wait an hour because the icy runways in Vermont. And then after an hour, I said, "Well, we got to go back in because the woman pilot, she said, you know, we're going to be 3 hours." And then when we actually did get in to deplane, she said, "It's going to be tomorrow morning." I really apologize that those runways are too icy. And I didn't grumble. I just said, "Boy, I'm glad that person is keeping up." So I went back and I looked up, you know, what do you have to do to maintain as a pilot? And it's pretty strenuous about time commitment compared to ours. I mean, they have a whole group of things, and one of them is every 6 months they have to travel to meet with an examiner over a couple of days to be in front of the simulator. And I'm glad they do that. So I guess that's just saying I believe in the certification process, but it's how do we market that?
That's a great story. I mean, that, I think really, you're right, I never thought about that either, but I think that's a very powerful story.
A quick question for you. Is a process or Mocha Peds, is that more expensive or less expensive than
Show people that.
the center testing that's performed now?
I'm sorry.
Mocha Peds
Yeah.
versus the center testing that's performed now. Is it a more expensive process, less expensive, and would that be reflected in the fees?
It's very expensive for the board to produce, but from your standpoint, it will not cost anything different. You'll still have the same, haven't been able to lower that. It'll still be that $1,304, $275 per year. But that will include there's no additional fee for doing Mocha Peds. If you do the proctored exam, there is a fee, and I don't want to be quoted, but I'm close to this. It's like $140 that the Prometric Center charges to have your rear end sitting in the seat with only one handkerchief in your back pocket. One cleaning. Did that answer that? Okay, good, thanks.
I have a question.
Feet, no increase.
I have a question, it's not related to motor fees at all.
Sure.
So since I've double boarded and I do take my recertification and I did not get grandfathered in as my partner did, so I have to do both sets. And it's nice that now I don't have to do both sets of mock, I can only do one set and have it count. My biggest problem is insurance companies, because they don't know what to do with me. So CareSource, I've been in practice for 20 years, I am still listed as only a pediatrician. And my adult patients can't have me listed as their doctor because I'm only listed as a pediatrician. We have fought with them numerous times. My partner is listed as the adult and not as the pediatrician. So that's been a huge problem that people can't recognize us as we are two separate entities able to care for the entire family.
I'll take it back. I don't know quite what we would do about that, but we'll try. You ought to get that, that ought to be simple. That sound,
It's an insurance issue, I guess I'll do something else.
by the way, I did get grandfathered in, but I do MOC. And about 40% of grandfathers continue to do that. So it's a good number that don't, but it's a pretty good number that do, actually, where it's volunteer. And just because it's also on the rumor on the street, well, these people like David Nichols and so on, they don't have to do MOC. Everybody who works for the board has to do MOC. There have been very good people writing questions, a good person who, my main work actually is with behavioral mental health now, kids, and with initiatives with the board and the National Academy of Medicine. And the key person that was helping me at the board was grandmother in. And she just didn't want to keep up her MOC, and I lost her as my key ally in that.
So earlier, Chris had asked about how they vet the questions, and I just wondered, what is the process for vetting the QI processes? So if I apply, in my office, I'm doing this in my office, how are we vetting to ensure that it's a formal QI process where I actually go through the process of,
You call the board, I'll give you a card at the end of that. You call the board, you ask them, is that what you meant?
No, I mean, how is the board, what process is the board using to say that these are
Oh, I see,
appropriate
whether it's
QI?
good or not, yeah. So there are quality improvement people at the board. It's a small staff. It used to take a long time to get those back. They went through a project called Lean, if any of you are familiar with that, and they've tightened it up so that now, actually, most people get their answers back in about 36 hours, but certainly within a week. And it used to be 2 or 3 weeks to get that. But they're all QI people, and they have criteria for doing that.
And they'll give you
And
feedback too, when you submit the application, it was great, the application's very short, it's a $75 fee. And you can email it to them and say, hey, am I on the right track? Will we get credit for this? And they'll get back to you.
This is for 4.
This is for part 4. So this is the 10 person or less. So let's say you're in your office, I'm in private practice, we're having a hard time, we suck at getting our ASQs done. So we're gonna come up, we basically go through a PDSA cycle, how are we gonna improve that? You sort of write it out. I believe let's correct me if it's 2 cycles or 3 cycles that you
I
have.
mean, 3 points, so you got a baseline
Yeah,
of 2,
so you have-
3 cycles.
And you can email that ahead of time, you fill out the application, and they'll tell you, yes, you're on the right track, no, this is what we tweak. And then, that way you're not doing an entire project, you submit it, and they're like, yeah, no, that's not gonna do what, give that credit.
By the way, the $75, you don't like the $75, squawk a little bit at that. There wasn't a fee to begin with. And, so you may not want to hear this, but there wasn't a fee to begin with, but people started sending in, I mean, it's a staff of 3 in there, okay? People started sending in, loads of people would send in, I read 2 articles on QI, and I read one now, and I read one another time, is that good enough? And there were so many of those that just, as a deterrent, and that's not really a good way to run the operation, but that's what that $75 is. I think that, I'm squawking, I think we'll probably get rid of that $75 fee, hopefully in time for you.
I have a related question. Ohio has portfolio status. And from what you said, Ohio could then go ahead and designate these MOC4 programs.
Absolutely.
Good.
Do it, because.
Yes.
So the chapter actually got portfolio status before national did. right? So we were early on in developing these programs, and part of the reason we were able to do that is we had this committee and oversight body in place specifically designed to be able to do that, to be able to grant that. Now,
The grant that customized MOC.
well, that's what our concern was that we were really flooded with those. And we were just discussing this morning that in reality, there ended up being more funders coming to us saying, we want to change the standard of care. We want you to leverage MOC to improve practice. So they were giving us money to do it. So much more of our as in doing that. I think our concern initially was that we get flooded with that. We've not, but we have that capability. And we have an oversight body in place to do it every month.
That's great.
So you essentially have three options. If you live in Ohio and you're a chapter member and you work for one of the major children's hospitals, it's also a portfolio sponsor. So you can submit it through the chapter, you can submit it if your institution has a portfolio, or if it's 10 or less pediatricians, you can submit it through the board, through the small group application.
I have a quick question about,
Sure.
you mentioned that in the MOC, the MOCA PEDS, that there's going to be an emphasis on sort of integrating new knowledge. And I know you meant in terms of guidelines and stuff, but sort of a philosophical question in terms of, does the board see and recognize its role in driving the standard of care, in the sense that with the new recognition of the social determinants of health and the mental health issues concerned, they're talking about that much more in terms of gaps of care and meet that care. It's much more in the realms of advocacy and that, and are we going to, does the board see its role in trying to, in terms of training new physicians and trainees and what's going to be in the board and the actual board exams, preparing pediatricians for the future to fill those gaps in care? That's a very broad question. You know what I'm saying? That as practice changes, to be a really good pediatrician, it's not so much necessarily knowing, the Krebs cycle as much as it is knowing how to talk to families and how to advocate for families and to fill those social determinants of health.
Speaking my language, man. So I just gonna quickly tell you this, and they probably wanna shut me down here, but, I hope others might be interested in this, right? But I just was leading a meeting at the National Academy of Medicine 10 days ago. And the idea was to bring it's one of the drivers for the behavioral mental health stuff, which I know is according to what you do. But the idea was to bring together dyads of the department chairmen and program directors. And we tried to get a third, small, medium, large programs. We wanted to get a dozen, we had 13. They came eagerly. And then we brought in all the other pediatric organizations you can think of, AAP, ACG, et cetera. And then we brought in payers, funders, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Medicaid, parents who come in, tell stories and listen, trainees. And everybody that I invited to this, everybody had to make the commitment ahead of time that they would make a commitment at this meeting, okay, to make a change. And the goal is, you can hear it now, is to make behavioral mental health. So it's just taking that aspect, not all the other issues that we need to deal with, but to me that's. So to embed that into every experience that a trainee has during their residency. So you go to the emergency department, you have someone there that's teaching you about mental health, talking to patients, doing things. Somebody came with a broken arm. Maybe they fell off the slide, but maybe it was a parent, all the things you want to know. And but maybe they were bullied, et cetera. So that was the goal of that. So I'm just saying, yes, the board is doing things. That was something that they allowed me to do. And we're going to keep pushing that. Thanks for your question. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for what everybody does. Can I go on, or is there people, I'm sort of off stage, right?
Yes, are we on a
Yeah, I think we can do about 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes?
That's fine.
Anybody got burning questions? Ready to bathroom break? Scared the nervousness out of you.
This is, we can bring it down a little, not as serious, but with regard to the MOCA testing, some of us have a little test anxiety.
Yes.
Did you get any feel for what people felt about taking it at home? Was it a reduced test anxiety? You know, that time limit of 5 minutes, was that doable, or did it cause some people to cave and panic?
Yeah, most people had much reduced anxiety versus the proctor exam. you know, there are some of us who are gonna have anxiety, almost everybody has some anxiety in a test, no matter what the situation is. But there was a lot less with the Mookapines. Some of those people wrote that they had test anxiety and they would really like to have more than 5 minutes on a question. And that's being looked at. How can we do that? Right now, the reason for more than limiting to 5 minutes is really two. And the main one is because the board still has some feeling for this meeting to be secure and individual, you're answering it for you. That 5 minutes keeps you from bringing it to the AAB meeting, you know, answer it. By the way, group learning, we were talking, Bob and I were talking about that, and it's some of the best learning we had was when we've done questions in group learning. But at least currently, that's the feeling. Anxiety is less. Anxiety is less.
I think that's good.
If you have anxiety, you talk about yourself, you don't have to admit this, but if you're talking about yourself,
Maybe.
okay, yeah, no, if you're talking about yourself and you do this, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear how that might be different or what it was about it. I mean, what could be done differently. So, I mean, some of us are gonna have more anxiety no matter what the process is.
And I can deal with my test anxiety if it's once every 5 or 10 years, but I don't want to have to do it every week.
It's immersion therapy. You'll get over it. You'll get over it, Rodney.
You got a man here that can help you. I think you'll find that people who had anxiety had less anxiety as this went on. It becomes a routine. And you know, one of the benefits is that you can look something up. One of the benefits is that you can miss a question. You could miss 19 of the 20 questions one quarter. That's okay.
So I actually was part of the pilot, so I can speak firsthand that they do give you a list of learning objectives in advance. So if you're freaky like me, I actually went through and did a little research on each one of those things. So I had a basic knowledge of what those questions were. So I did my studying up front, and I knew my studying was done pretty much for the year. All I had to do was review the notes that I had before I went and took those 20 questions. And I thought it was fine. I mean, I really did. I would agree that I think there probably is a need to have a little more than 5 minutes on some questions, only because in real practice, you're not going to make a snap decision. You're going to go and get it. Practice. I'm not just going to wing it. That's what I mean. I can take my time and get an answer. So I think that would be, and the only other comment I would have with the Mookapines pilot would be that when you got an answer wrong, it was a generic response that tried to answer all the possible questions and all the possible answers, and maybe technically harder, but it seemed like it would be really good if you answered this question and we understand why you thought this is why it was wrong. A specific answer for that answer as opposed to the generics. Does that make sense, right? Because sometimes you have to go through to find, whoa, what was it wasn't very clear sometimes why the answer was right or wrong. If that makes sense.
The role wasn't too long, but nonetheless, I see what you're saying, they're directed that way.
It was directed, if the response was directed to you answered this and this is why that's not correct. And then there's other information as opposed to, well, I answered that, but you're answering the question for something that I already knew. But in general, I would say that it's a great way to go. You know what I mean? It's less stressful. It's only a couple of it's an hour and you're done.
Yeah, there are people, because we're all different, right? We're all the same, we're all different. But there are people who like the 5 minutes because they become more anxious in a long period of time. So, but if you get feedback, I really appreciate hearing that.
I thought the best way that you guys did questions was when we sent a little list. And I remember this was when we did it 7 years ago. And when the parents come home and they find their kid comatose on the living room floor and he's a ER doctor, we kind of go through basically the whole thought process of, do I want to ask this question? Is this the kind of look we're going to, he's got points of discussion for everything that we did. And at the end, it was great, but at the end, you know, there was a reading thing, you had to read it, you would go on to it. I love that.
Almost everybody did. And you wonder why it didn't survive, but it didn't survive because of people are going to cheat no matter what the system is, right? And number one, I wouldn't be bothered if people answered this as a group anyway, from what Bob and I were saying earlier, learn as a group. But this came on the heels of, you may have heard about the massive cheating that took place with 2 other boards. Not pediatricians, but 2 other boards. But then there were a number of parents who called the board and said that the pediatricians were bragging that they hadn't even done their exams, that they had their partners do them. I mean, don't even earmuffs. I don't even want to hear that. I don't even want to hear that. You know, I mean, it's just, so there were some things in saying, you know, still, you can still argue. Come on, let's take care of the masses and help everybody learn. But that's what drove away from that. This is an attempt to get back to it, and I think it'll get even better. The master is standing, so I appreciate everybody's attention. And my short-term memory is okay now, so everything that you brought up will go back to the board. And if you're not hearing things, you want to bring up something different, Bob will have my contact information, Elizabeth will have it, you're welcome to get a hold of me.
And then we're gonna talk about secondhand